to the Monday Motivation Spotlight. Today we have a longer episode than usual, a special episode honoring a special woman on International Women's Day. So who is our guest today? Today, our amazing guest is the one and only Shari Mendes, who is the founder and director of the Israel Lemonade Fund. And what is the Israel Lemonade Fund? It's the Israel's first and only breast cancer emergency relief fund, which operates nationwide, providing financial support and aid to breast cancer patients so they can help manage their illness and not have to worry about financial illness. Since experiencing breast cancer herself, Shari made the decision. She never intended to open a nonprofit, but to start a nonprofit where she turned her personal challenge into a source of hope for others. In addition, since 2010, Shari has been a member of an all-women's reserve unit in the IDF, tasked with all the procedures involved in requiring to care for deceased female soldiers, which means also accompanying them during the identification process and preparing them for burial, a task which is not easy, and especially since October 7th, which you will hear we're talking about. So let's hear Shari's story, the amazing work she's doing, and we will definitely all come out feeling inspired. Shari, I am so excited to have you here today as our guest on the Monday Motivation Spotlight. We've met in person once. We had quite a lot of email contact before trying to schedule a day to do this. And being the busy person that you are, Baruch Hashem, I'm so glad that we actually made a time and we were able to do this. So thank you so much for joining us as our guest.
Thank you.
Let's take us back, our viewers back to Shari Mendes growing up in the States before you made Aliyah, what your life was like there, what type of a person were you, what type of world were you involved in, and what brought you to actually make Aliyah, take the decision to make Aliyah?
That's such a wonderful question. I don't know what kind of person I was, probably a grumpy teenager for a lot of it. I grew up in a lot of my life in a very small town in Pennsylvania, and then I moved to New Jersey for a bit, and I went to college and graduate school in New York City, where I met my husband, first day of college. And I had always wanted to move to Israel. I came here and did a sort of an internship during graduate school with an architect here. And I thought I'd come back right after I graduated from architecture school. And life sort of got in the way. We got married. My husband he's a physician. He did a very long residency. And then we had very sick parents for a while. And just suddenly our oldest was 13. And we have 4 children, thank God. And we said, if we don't do this now, this is our little window. They're all going to go to college. We'll have grandchildren. And I have new grandchildren. And I was right. You don't want to leave grandchildren. So we said, let's go and try it for a year. We were living a very easy life in Teaneck. It was even hard to sell our children on there'll be kosher restaurants in Israel, because I think there might have been actually more kosher restaurants in Teaneck, New Jersey than anywhere in the world. So we did. We came to Ra'anana in 2003 with 4 children. And my husband was working at the time at Tel HaShomer, and I started up my architecture practice, and we were very happy in Ra'anana. It's a very wonderful community, very supportive, full of olim, and we lived there for 16 years. And right before COVID, we said, let's go take a sabbatical year in Jerusalem. And my parents had an apartment here, so we moved into the apartment, and we're still in Jerusalem in that sabbatical year, 6 years later.
Right, that sabbatical year turned out to be very successful. It's funny how you call it a sabbatical year, because It's literally like living in 2 different countries in some ways.
Yes, but I feel very privileged because I feel like we still have our close ties to Ra'anana. We made wonderful friends there. We really did our Aliyah and grew up with them, from 2003 to 2019. And Jerusalem is also, it's Jerusalem. It's such a privilege to live here also. So
Exactly. There's only one Jerusalem. It's very, very special. It's just living in Israel and living in Jerusalem are 2 very, very special things. As I mentioned to you before, I chose to move to the coast a couple of years ago, but I'm in Jerusalem all the time. In fact, my Teudat Zehut still shows that I live in Jerusalem, so I consider myself half.
It's amazing. It's just wonderful. It's wonderful. We live in Abu Tor, which is also just, it's very pretty. We have a very beautiful view of the old city. And I just pinch myself every day that I get to live in Israel. I'm still like an Ola Hadasha, like amazed that I get to be here. Feel very
Right.
lucky.
The specialty of living in this country, together with the challenges, which we'll talk about a little bit later, because you know firsthand with your position. I was going to say tough kid. We have to be careful to use English words here because we have fellows listening also from abroad with what you are doing. So take us back. So in other words, you made Aliyah, you settled your children, you worked as an architect for a couple of years.
For
And
20
then
years.
what
For
happened?
20 years, I worked as an
20,
architect.
so not exactly a
Yeah.
couple, 20
No,
years.
20 in America, 20 here, a long, long time. Yeah.
Right. And then what happened that you changed trajectory?
I didn't mean to. I feel like life has sort of always done this to me. It puts me in a position where I've thrown a few lemons, and you can sit with the lemons or you can make lemonade. But I'm often not in a place where I choose these situations. I was just rolling along and having a very normal life. In 2010, I was suddenly diagnosed with breast cancer. And it was a huge shock because I had gone for a routine mammogram. This is a plug for mammograms. Everyone must please, please, please schedule your yearly mammogram. My mammogram saved my life because I had no family history, I had no symptoms, and suddenly I was a cancer patient. And early diagnosis is an advantage. And I had breast cancer, and it was shocking and difficult. And during that year of treatment, I was very fortunate to have my husband's in the medical system, and I had good family support. I was pretty quiet about my situation because I was trying to keep my architecture practice afloat during all this, and my children were still teenagers, and my life is my private life. So I was just doing this, and I wasn't really talking about it much. But I noticed in waiting rooms that some people just were just desperately poor. And one thing I have to say about having cancer is I don't think anything was ever as scary as that. You really don't know if you're going to survive. And I was a young mother pretty much. And I thought, what could be scarier than this? And then I thought, being very sick and having to worry about money. Like, what I only thought about that often. At least I'm not rich, I'm not poor, but I don't have to worry about if I lose time from work, I can't pay my electric bill. I might get evicted. There was a woman in the waiting room and I was at Meir Hospital for part of my treatment in Kfar Saba, and there was a woman in the waiting room who smelled terrible. This might have been in Tel Shomer. I'm sorry, I don't remember. And I asked the social worker, no one would sit near her. I said, what is the story with this? It's so sad. She was an Ethiopian woman and she was dressed in rags and she had a terrible stench. And the social worker said she can't afford a washing machine and she is in chemo and she's vomiting on herself. And that was like a changing moment for me. And I thought to myself, how is it? The medical care is excellent here. I don't think I paid 150 shekels throughout my treatment. It's amazing, the national health care, but there are non-medical costs. And what do you do if you are poor and shouldn't have to have financial stress when you're nervous about surviving? And I thought that in a country where a lot of us can afford to help those who have nothing, we should help them. And I researched and I saw during this year that there's a model for this. It's called the Breast Cancer Emergency Relief Fund. Many other countries have them, but Israel didn't have one. The idea is to give people an emergency grant during the first year after diagnosis so that they can deal with the non-medical expenses. Breast cancer treatment is very long, and it's one of the longest courses of treatment. And really, you miss a lot of time from work. And, there's a statistic in America that within 6 months, a formerly healthy person and a formerly solvent family, a serious illness can cause them to go into bankruptcy. That's how quick you can go from being fine to being completely desperate. I mean, I started to ask around. I heard stories of people who they were more nervous about their financial situation than their disease. One of the first things they said to social workers is, I can't go into treatment because I can't lose my job. I'm the sole breadwinner. I'm a single mother. And I just thought we've got to help this. So I had no intention ever of starting a nonprofit. And I did it for a while under there's an organization in Israel, wonderful organization called ESRA. They took us as one of their welfare funds because I didn't know anything about running a nonprofit. And eventually we grew and grew and grew. And we decided in about 5, 6 years ago, this was in 2011 when I did this, but about 5, 6 years ago, we made it's called the Lemonade Fund, its own independent registered charity. And that first summer, when they said I had missed my 50th birthday because it was that year, and I sort of came out to all my friends, everybody I knew in Israel. I sent an invitation, and I had been diagnosed on Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the month of Av, which is the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. And I decided that was a message, that I had to turn destruction into reconstruction. And I invited everyone I ever knew into my backyard. And I said, I'd like to start this charity. This is what happened to me during this last year. A lot of people didn't know because I was just private. And I said, we need to start this charity. We raised enough money to give our first 3 grants in August of 2011 in Mayer Hospital.
That's incredible. So just so I can understand correctly, if I understood the timeline correctly, is that even while you were going through the treatments, you obviously, on the one hand, you were self-absorbed in your own body and yourself and your family, but you were already then thinking, because you saw patients like this woman, about how I can help other people, even while you were still going through this yourself?
Look, it's very hard not to be empathetic because I understood how scared I was. And I just couldn't stand the idea of somebody being so terrified about surviving and also have to worry about money. So there was just no question we had to do this. It was also it was just something that had to be done. There was no question. I did not call it the Lemonade Fund at first. That's a funny story.
Right. I actually want to ask you about the name, but just I want to comment on what you just said. When you said it was something that had to be done, not everyone takes, we talk about also in business and certainly with nonprofits, we all have our whys, our reason for starting something or for wanting to do something. And your reason was very, very valid. The fact that you yourself were also suffering from this and were being affected by it. Yes, it would have been equally strong if you had decided, or maybe not equally strong, would have been very strong if you had decided, yes, I want to start this nonprofit based on other things that you'd seen. But the moment you had been in this physical situation and then were able to emphasize with people and sympathize and empathize with people going through it, but they had this extra thing. So it's not such a given that someone just gets up and says, I'm going to start a nonprofit, because you're going through a lot of this yourself.
Lizzie, I appreciate that. And that's so kind of you. But you would have done it and your listeners would have done it. I know it because it's just too painful to know that fear and to worry about people having a second level of fear. It's terror. So I think everybody would have done it. I just believe that. So, but thank you.
Well, that's incredible. So tell us now where the name came, the Lemonade Fund. I know you spoke about turning lemons into lemonade, so maybe that had something to do with it.
You know, I sent out this invitation to this event on August 7th, 2011, and I put lemons around it because I said life has given me lemons and we need to make lemonade. And I want to start this organization. And originally I called it the Israel Breast Cancer Emergency Relief Fund, which is such a mouthful. And you can see from that what a non-marketer I am. And I called it the IBCERF, and I couldn't even remember the initials. And it sort of organically became the Lemonade Fund. And that's actually a wonderful name because that is exactly what you need to do when a bad thing happens to you. You need to turn lemons into lemonade. So, and I think it even inspires the people we help. Just to give you a fast update, because I don't want to leave you thinking right now that the Lemonade Fund helps 3 people a month at Mayor Hospital. We're now nationwide. We help between 40 and 50 people a month. First, they just have to be Israeli citizens within their first year of diagnosis. They have to prove financial need. They need to come to us through the social worker at the hospital. It helps them not be embarrassed that they have to ask for help. The middleman
Right.
really
Also,
helps.
that exactly that it's through the social worker. So your
Yeah,
team and you have connected with the different hospitals through the social
yes,
workers.
yes. And we go
And
to
of course,
hospitals.
in time, they got to hear about you, and I'm sure many of
Yes.
them have approached you.
Yes, we're actually the known safety net for women with breast. And actually, in January 2025, we made a very, very, I think, um, faith-based decision to expand to gynecological cancers because we kept hearing about ovarian cancer patients and people with uterine cancer. And we just decided we are the place for women to go when they need help while they're in treatment for women's cancers. So as of now, we're also helping women with gynecological cancers. Ovarian cancer is a
Wow,
very
that's
tough.
incredible. It makes sense because your
Yeah,
target market is women, so it definitely makes
yeah,
sense. And in
yeah.
some ways, then it's good from a branding point of view that you called it the Lemonade Fund and not the initial name, because
Yes,
although people do add and change things. Wow,
yes.
that's incredible, truly remarkable. And just the numbers that you're saying. Do you want to tell us a little bit about statistics and or whatever you know, even if not statistics, what percentage, or do you know what percentage of these patients recover afterwards, lead fully functioning lives, or you're not quite
Yeah,
sure?
yeah. It's actually really that's the good news. There's a lot of good news. There's a huge difference between 2010 and 2026, also in breast cancer treatment. I would say about 5,000 women a year. 1% are men. We just had the man last month who get breast cancer. Can happen.
Wow.
About 5,000 people a year get breast cancer. And, early detection does save lives. It's not a guarantee, but we don't give medical advice, but the percentages are in the 90s of people who are still alive 5 years later who are detected early and go through treatment. So that's very good news. It's not the same with gynecological cancers. That's a whole different story. But every day there are new treatments. There's biological drugs now, immunotherapy, and there's cutting edge treatment. And Israel is also, I would say, very progressive in its treatment of these cancers. And I feel very privileged to live here.
Absolutely. It's true that just the medical, yes, there are things that we don't cover here, but there's so much that we do. Now, talking
Mm.
of that, I was just thinking the age that the Kupot Cholim, the medical aids, allow a woman to start doing mammograms. If I'm not mistaken, they changed the age as well. It used to be 50, now it's 40, or what age is it? And is that the age that you're seeing your patients from that age on, or do you see many younger ones that maybe aren't taking mammograms because, or for whatever reason, because if the medical aid's covering it, then there's no financial cost. Let's just talk about that. Why aren't people taking it as often? From what age do the medical aids cover them?
There is policy in most countries, I believe, and please don't quote me on this. This ought to be checked out because this is not what we deal with as much, but I think it might be 50 every 2 years. But that being said, anyone who has a medical history, which is no guarantee of anything. Again, I had no medical history, but anyone who feels they have had any risk can request a mammogram, and they're almost never declined for something like that or an ultrasound. Unfortunately, we're seeing younger and younger women having breast cancer. I think last month, 46% of our applicants were under 50. So the average age of breast cancer, I think, is 65, but we are seeing younger and younger people with breast cancer. I have to say that Israel is also a country where we have a lot of BRCA positive genetic cancers. BRCA 1 and 2, that's the main gene that's associated with breast and ovarian cancer. And that tends to hit people younger and more aggressively often than non-genetic cancers. And we have a lot of Ashkenazi. It's an Ashkenazi gene. It's 1 in 40 in Ashkenazi Jews. It's 1 in 400 in the general population. So, you know, you know, there. there's a really good, compelling argument for every single citizen of Israel to go take a simple blood test to see if they're BRCA positive. And then you can be screened more carefully. It does not mean you're going to get breast cancer. It means you might have a greater risk, but it means you can be screened more carefully, and knowledge is power. So there's an,
Absolutely, totally knowledge is power.
and
Before
it's
we move on to the
free.
next part of Sherry's life and what's the amazing work that you're doing, have you ever thought, or maybe you have done this already, of doing advocacy on behalf of the Lemonade Fund, going to the Knesset to try get women to or to allow women to do mammograms from a younger age?
So there are other breast cancer organizations in Israel that is really their tafkid, their job.
Mm-hmm,
There's an
mm-hmm.
organization called One in Nine, and advocacy is their job. I would like to go to the Knesset to advocate for higher financial benefits. Our whole focus is on getting people to have enough financial support that they don't delay or miss treatment. We are not advocating for anything medical, for drugs, for more mammograms. There are plenty of other, the Israel Cancer Association, that's more their job. But the National Insurance Institute, Bituach Leumi in Hebrew, like Social Security in America, the payments that they give to subsidize sick people while they're out with this disease are relatively low, and they haven't risen much. They haven't risen with the cost of living, and the very, very poor in Israel are, and they're sick. They're not their best advocates, and and people say to me, "Why do people need money when they're sick in Israel?" They need money because this doesn't cover their basic costs. And somebody who lives in Arad, who is a single parent of three children, who for whatever reason is not getting alimony and she's the sole breadwinner for her family. It doesn't, she can't make ends meet. So I would love to advocate for more financial support. But until that happens, we are the safety net, and we're ubiquitous. We're known everywhere now. And a person walks in with a diagnosis of breast cancer, and they say they're worried about money, and the social worker says to them, "Don't worry, there's the Lemonade Fund." And that, when I heard that
That
story,
must give you such a nachat, if that's the right word, just knowing that you can give them that relief, even though I'm sure you cannot and don't accept everybody. But I guess the social workers have actually learned also who is more appropriate to forward to you or not.
right, we have a very rigorous vetting system. I mean, we are giving people money, and we're empowering them to spend it as they deem fit. We don't dictate. We don't pay their rent for them. Israel's a very kind country, and if you are diagnosed with a serious disease, your property taxes are lowered, your utilities are lowered for the period while you're sick. So that's not where the people need the money. But let's say a person needs money to put her children in a summer program so she can go to treatment. It's not our place to tell her, don't do that. I'd much rather give the person a grant. It's a one-time grant during the first year, and say you use it as you need it. We have a very strict point system. People get points based on their financial situation, their health situation, and their social situation. So if they are living without a partner, they're stage 4 at the beginning of their treatment. If they're near the end, they get fewer points because everything is about, they'll be closer to going back to work, God willing. So this
Yeah.
is sort of a bridge loan to help them. It's an emergency relief fund to help them get through that year so that they can go to treatment and focus on recovery with like a clear head. That's the idea of the organization. But we don't give to everybody. Some people don't qualify. They actually have too much money. So we
Right. Okay. No, such an important thing. So, as if you're not doing enough, and I'm sure that is pretty much a full-time position, as you said beforehand, you didn't intend. Your goal was not to start a nonprofit. You were a happy architect, just sailing along in your life and doing what you love doing. So, Hashem obviously led you to this shlucha, or to this mission of actually doing this. So,
I
as if
actually
that
love
wasn't
this.
enough.
I love this
Uh-huh.
too. I didn't know I would love it, but it's very, 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 it's a wonderful thing also. in a different way.
Right. Just knowing that you're helping someone, there's a saying that when we actually give, we actually gain more. So,
Oh,
and giving is not necessarily only money. Yes, that's what your nonprofit does, but you're giving of yourself too and everything
and
else.
Leslie, I know I might be like saying too much, but there's one more thing that I think is so important. These people, we're seeing them. These are the most invisible people in our society. They're often, the cleaner, or the I can't explain, the elder care worker, and then they get sick. Nobody sees them. A lot of the thank you notes that we do get unsolicited is not only thank you for the money, but I feel like you saw me and I feel like you
That is
cared
so
for me.
important.
And it really taught me that we in society need to see everyone around us. It's important. So
That is so true. I think that's so very, very important what you're saying. So very important.
I had to add that.
Yeah, I'm delighted that you did because I think that's something very important that we need to all pay attention, to in our
Yeah.
day-to-day life when we're walking past people, when we're doing things, not to only notice the powerful, well-known celebrities, but yes, to pay attention to even the cleaning people and the people around. And
Yeah.
we've heard stories of this. I'm not sure if they're stories from Israel about. I remember a story about an employee that would always go in and greet the shomer, the guard at the entrance. He would always greet him. And when the guard passed away, he left a lot of his money to him. And it turned out that he was this wealthy guy that I don't know why he was working in that position, but because he was respected, people looked at him. They just didn't walk in past him. They actually, the guy spoke to him and greeted him. So, and that's a true story. I don't remember exactly where I heard it, but it's a true story. People like and want and need to be heard and seen.
Yes, exactly. And poverty and illness, I think, are the two things that make you feel the most powerless. Physical
I agree.
power. If you're very, very, very like vulnerable financially, you're really, really nobody sees you. So it's important.
That's very important.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'd like to move on to you. You're well known for many, many things. And the second thing, a lot of people know less about, but many, on the other hand, do know. And Shari has also, since October 7th, but even before October 7th, you were part of the Army, the IDF. You were a volunteer. And then, as we spoke about now before, you've officially been given the status of a reservist, of a miluimnik. Tell us about that experience, the horrifying experiences of October 7th. And I honestly say, kola kavod, and take off my hat, which doesn't exist right now, but my hat to you because you are doing work which most people would not be able to do. And I'd like you to expand on that so our viewers understand what you're doing. And I will add that Shari also recently received a very worthwhile award in the Woman of Irons Award from Chokhmat Nashim. I was very, I don't want to say honored, privileged, or happy to be at the event that I could be there when people like you were receiving this award. So tell us a little bit about that.
Leslie, again, I appreciate that, but I have to say again, I think that, and this is not false modesty, on October 7th, Israelis all over the land stepped up to do things that they never thought they could do. We all did that. So my story is, again, I was in a place that I never expected to be, and I guess God puts you in places where He thinks you can handle it. About in 2010, also, a very good friend of mine said that the Army Rabbinate would like to put together a unit of women to help. God forbid were joining combat units. God forbid a young woman soldier dies. They really didn't have a staff in place of people who do preparation for burial, chevra kadisha. And I don't do that in my private life. Most of the people they asked did. But they also wanted a small group of people who would accompany the women during the identification process. Israel is very strict. The IDF is very strict. that everybody has to be 100% identified. You have a lot of Sarah Cohens in this country. You cannot make a mistake. So there's a very
No,
rigorous,
absolutely. I mean, there are countries that are not, but we couldn't
yeah.
imagine the disastrous situation if they were not strict with identification.
Exactly, exactly. So I was more brought in, I'm an architect, I'm okay with computers, more to be on the identification, fingerprint. That was my sort of tough keyed specialty in this unit. And once a year we had a training session on the rabbinate base, and a very nice group of women. Again, most did Chevra Kadisha in their private lives. I since I didn't do that, I wasn't called up, but we always knew that we had to train for a mass casualty event. That was what we were training for. I don't think any of us had any concept of what a mass casualty event, maybe 10 women, 5 women. Like we had no one in Israel had any concept of this. And ironically, in early 2023, the Army decided to change us from volunteers to official, that we got drafted in our 50s and 60s, which is another time, but quite a funny
Wow. And this was
story.
2023 before October 7th, you're saying?
Well, just by coincidence, although you may say
Wow.
there's coincidence, but there were a lot of funny stories about being online, with a bunch of 17-year-old boys and getting on the bus at the drafting station, and they said to me, "Grandmas are not allowed on the bus." And I said, "No, I'm a soldier. I'm a soldier." So anyway,
Wow.
we were drafted, and it's a good
And
thing.
actually, before you tell the story, how did your kids and your family, your husband, feel about having a wife and mother as a beluimnik or as a chayelet?
I think they all teased me because I was the only one who had done, my husband volunteered when he got here. All of our children served. So I was the only one who had never done army service. And so they all thought this was, don't forget, we never really did much. Most of us never did much. Thank God women soldiers were not dying. And it was just sort of something to put on hold for emergencies. I think my kids, when I brought them home my green uniform, I think they thought it was kind of cute. I think that's what they thought.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Anyway,
All right. So then you had a smile on your face for a while until October 7th happened.
yeah, and I mean, I don't want to minimize, any soldier that died even before October 7th is of course very sad. There was just, you have to take a few moments when there's a humorous moment, which is a bunch of 60-year-old women getting drafted. It was kind of funny at the Bakum, the place where we got drafted.
And
But
truth is, that's how we often turn tragedy into, by adding a bit of humor, just making it light makes it easier
right,
to deal with it.
right. I mean, there's not a whole lot of things that are light about dealing with death, but it was a part of life. But October 7th, all that turned on its head, and there was nothing natural about October 7th. So on that day, I was like everyone else in my shelter, getting, lots of alerts on my phone, but I didn't answer my phone because it was a holiday. It was Saturday. And at a certain point, I looked around and I said, this could be that mass casualty. We have a lot of UN people who live in our building, and they were all talking about what was happening. And I said, this could be that mass casualty event. And I had something called a Tzav Shmona on my phone, which is, an emergency call up to war. It only happens when there's war. And so in shifts, our units started to report that Saturday night. And I went in the next morning. My shift was the next morning, and we only dealt with female soldiers that were killed. The Army made a very wise decision to turn the National Army morgue into the National Morgue for all victims, civilians, and the Nova Festival. Everyone came there. It was centralized. Our unit dealt with soldiers. We accompanied them through identification and preparation for burial. And what we saw for that day and for weeks after was unimaginable. Um, I have a hard time talking about it anymore. What happened was, we did our work, and there was no question that we saw terrible brutality, we saw mutilation, and there was no question that you said to yourself, I can't do this, because it was one of these things that you had to do this for the families. The families were waiting to know what happened to their loved one. No one knew. We can't forget. the chaos. Not, it wasn't chaos at the morgue, it was actually very organized, but the chaos that was overall in the country, the panic, what happened to my loved one? Because you didn't know right away. There were more than 1,000.
Right. Had they been killed? Were they injured? Or had they been
Exactly.
kidnapped?
Exactly. And this was like a central place where people were being identified. So there was no question it was your duty. Where they had to be helped. That they had to be identified and prepared. And it was a very respectful place. People were dealt with very lovingly. I mean, even in the rush, our unit, it's a unit of women who dealt with women. We treated these young 18, 19-year-old girls like they could have been our daughters. We took the time. We balanced efficiency with sensitivity. We took the time to love them for a minute because we knew we'd probably be the last people to see them. And it was very, 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 very hard. There's no question that Israel went through a terrible time. And what began to happen, eventually, all the people who needed to be identified and buried were buried. But then what began to happen in October of 2023 was there began to be, and everyone who's listening knows this, there began to be denial of October 7th, which was unfathomable to us who had seen what we had seen. And they began to come to Shura, which is that's where the morgue is, and that's the rabbinate base. And they began to come there because that was the only place where they could prove and bear witness, because there were containers of bodies waiting for parts of bodies waiting for identification. So that was
Oh,
the
that is so hard to imagine. Right. Not just bodies, but body parts.
right, because there was no Nova, you couldn't bring people to the kibbutzim. That was the place. So there were news organizations from all over the world and politicians from all over the world. And at Shura, we were called on to give interviews and testimony about what we saw. And I was representing the IDF. There was a rabbi, sometimes police, a dentist. We were talking to them, bearing witness, and it was crazy that we had to tell them what we saw. But I was doing it mostly because I speak English, and that's why. And it soon became worse and worse and worse. And that became actually my service segued a lot into speaking often and giving testimony. And I was called on to talk at the UN in December of 23, just about the atrocities, to bear witness to what our units saw, because people need to know. And I felt it was hard to do. And with time, it's ironically gotten more difficult, not less.
Really, I
There
say sometimes time makes it easier, but you're saying it's more difficult.
I just repeated it so often, and I wanted it to always be these are people we're talking about. Testimony. I come from my mother was a Holocaust survivor, and the only way we knew what happened to most of our family was killed was from eyewitness testimony. So eyewitness testimony was very important to me. And I felt like we needed to be these women's voices. Um,
Wow, that is incredible. How does a person that is involved in these situations go home at the end of the day, manage to carry on with your regular life? How did you continue to do that? What about your families? They obviously, on the one hand, were asking you questions, wanting to know. There was a limit, obviously, to what you could share with them, and also what you wanted to share with them. How does one go about dealing with life? I want to say as normal, but nothing was as normal in that period.
During that time, we even started an emergency war grant fund for Lemonade Fund because we were hearing from social workers that women were evacuated. We all forget about that, but the North and the South, more than 100,000 Israelis had to leave their homes. So we were doing that in the middle of it also. And work was the most normal thing in my life. So I was happy to be able to come back to that. But,
But you were also torn between the two worlds, with the IDF world and also dealing with the Lemonade Fund.
no one in Israel questioned at that point we just did it. I mean, we were also driving from Jerusalem to the bases near Ramla, which is in the middle of the country. And there were rockets. Everybody, now it's so easy. We just to forget, but we can't forget the evacuated people, and we can't forget that we were driving through rockets. I mean, I'd be driving there and I'd pull over to the side of the road while the rockets were raining down. And you think to yourself, I'm on the
It's just so
way.
unimaginable. And
It's
the trauma of dealing
unimaginable.
with the one thing, but then the existing life-threatening things too with the rockets.
It was such a hard time for everybody. One of my grandmother's brother was in the Sonderkommando, and there was a time, if nobody knows, that was the worst unit in Auschwitz, like the worst unit in the worst place to be in the world. They were the people who were tasked to take the bodies out of the ovens, and they were only allowed to be their sentence was 6 weeks, and then they were murdered. And he was killed in the Auschwitz uprising because those people had nothing to lose. We know that from eyewitness testimony. But he was 20 years old, and there was a moment, I think my second or third day, where I thought, I don't know if I could keep doing this. I don't know if I have the inner strength to do this. I am not a medical person, and this is this. By the way, it wasn't fingerprints, and my wonderful team taught me everything to do for preparation for burial. Nothing. Our old jobs went by the wayside. It was all hands on deck, everybody doing everything, and they taught me what to do. And I'm very grateful. They're amazing women in this unit, and amazing. But I thought of my uncle, my great uncle, and I thought, you know what? If he could do it, you just I always thought of him, and it was interesting because I never knew him, but I thought he was 20 years old and he was doing that. You do this for your people. You do what you have to do. So we just did it.
And that's exactly, and it's our people. For sure, it's our people. It doesn't make the job any easier, though. So going
Yeah.
back to what I asked you before, how do you go home at the end of the day after having such an horrendous day doing what you're doing and be with your family and try be a mom and a wife?
I always felt like I was on the hierarchy of trauma in Israel after October 7th. I always felt like there were people who lost loved ones. You know, I would never really felt like my life. I mean, the rockets were hard, but I was never in danger. My children, even though there were five of us in one family in Miluim and reserves at once, but I never felt like anybody was in terrible danger because that's just where our positions were. So I never felt like even like I had a right to complain because my situation was so much better than other people's. There were people, I mean, I have a friend down the street who lost her son. I know my doctor's nephew was a hostage. I was helping people and it felt good to be able to help. I was grateful that I could help. Other people had it far worse.
Wow. Were you able to sleep at night?
Um, I have a really supportive, wonderful husband, and I have a really supportive family. And the Army did right away supply psychological help, which I thought was great, to all of us as needed. We had group Zooms. It was hard. It was hard.
Right.
You
I'm
can't,
sure
you
you were
come,
also exhausted, physically and mentally exhausted.
we were
So
exhausted and we had to sleep there for a while. And you don't sleep well there. And there were rockets in the middle of the night. So it was just such a crazy time. Um, but you compartmentalize too because you had a job to do. That's it. So
exactly. You focused and you do what you have to do. And that's what people do, when there's an emergency or when there's a sense like this that just somebody has to deal with it and not everyone is built for it. And you were chosen for this position. Shari, how did you feel and how did you see the reactions of people when you were giving testimony, many of them being deniers of what had actually happened?
that was very challenging. We who have lived through Holocaust denial and seen what we've seen could not believe that people were doubting our truth and what we saw. That was very, very difficult. And in fact, um, it was almost impossible to believe that people were challenging this, that we had to speak about what we saw so that they would believe us. that we had to, show them pictures of body bags so they would, why not just believe us? Um, but I felt like, this was our task. We had to say it. It's pretty hard. I spoke mostly, honestly. I felt it was my job to talk about how we in the Jewish state cared about the people we dealt with, Jewish, non-Jewish. There were many victims of October 7th, and we dealt with them very lovingly. They were never alone in the identification room. Their belongings were carefully cleaned and sent back to the families. We prepared them with such dignity, the dignity that their murderers didn't give them, we gave them. And I felt like that was my job to speak about that. We were first responders. We were the only first responders. Since October 7th, more and more testimony has come out. But we also had to balance kindness to the families here in Israel. Talking to external press the atrocities because they were terrible. That's what we saw. You didn't really that's not so kind to the families here. So it was a delicate balance, but mostly I was
balance of who was going to read it, which is why a lot of stuff is censored. And people that are funny in out of Israel, they see things and not always in Israel.
right. But I felt like that was an amazing thing Israel did because they cared about the families at the expense of maybe some good PR. So I thought that was actually very kind. But we as first responders, we were the only witnesses at first, so we had to talk. Wasn't easy.
I'm sure. I'm sure it wasn't easy at all. And I'm sure it's not easy now. And does one say it with emotion, or after saying it numerous times, one is able to detach emotion from it?
It's interesting, but there are certain things now because I was doing this like sometimes two or three interviews a day, and I was doing it so often and so purposefully and so truthfully and honestly that I felt like I'll deal with it when I stop doing this. I'm in a job now, and I'm just going to keep representing these people and what happened to them as best I can while I'm doing it. And when it's done, I'll think about it. And it's funny because now I'm at the point where I'm not testifying as much, and I'm thinking about it, and that's why it's actually harder now. Certain memories are very painful now. I think that
Right.
might
And an
be,
accumulation of you're talking about it all the time
yeah,
and having time now to just rethink it. And the fact also that thank God the life hostages were brought back.
yeah.
Everyone that needed to be buried, as hard as it may sound, was buried. So it could be that things are just settling down now that you're having more time to think about it.
I think that's what's happening actually, Leslie. I think you're right.
Right. Okay. So we're coming to the end of the podcast, which has gone on for longer than what we both intended. However, as you're our special guest for International Women's Day, and most people are not the special Shari Mendes, I know you're very humble and modest, but let's be honest, most people would not do and cannot do and do not do what you have done. So I would just like to end off with two things. Number one, asking you moving forward with everything that you've done in this world for Israel, for people, the wonderful work that you're doing for the Lemonade Fund as well as in the IDF. Where do you, Shari, see yourself in the coming years moving forward? What goals or vision do you still have for yourself, for your funds, for the country?
Oh, you're so sweet. See, I'm going to talk quickly because I spoke so much till now. Um, I have
You're the
three.
one that's meant to speak. You're our guest. It's not about you, it's about you.
I have three brand new grandchildren, my first grandchildren. And my first hope is to just be able to have the zechut to spend a lot of time with them. That is
And I
really,
see how passionate you are about it and how excited. And
oh my
I
God,
like to call myself a young savta, a young grandmother as well. So I can totally get what you're saying.
it's the best thing in the world to see my children being kept up all night by their babies. It's wonderful. But these children are just so cute. I want the Lemonade Fund to be not needed. That would be the best thing in the world. Cancer should be cured and people should have plenty of money. But until that
Amen.
time, I want the organization to go from strength to strength and be able to fund all the women who need help. We're working hard to make it a very, very permanent part of the Israeli nonprofit infrastructure. And I want to have time to be retired with my husband and watercolor.
Wow, that is incredible. So on that note, how can people reach you? How can people contribute, either by donating, volunteering? What can we do to help? And how can
Thank
people reach you?
People should feel free to reach me at www.lemonadefund.org. And we have an email there, and I'm happy to talk to them. Shari at lemonadefund.org is my email, SHARI. We welcome volunteers, financial donations, anything, suggestions. Happy to have the help.
Oh, amazing. Shari Mendes, it has been my pleasure and our pleasure to host you as a special woman. Many, many special women in this world, but you are one unique, very special Shari Mendes. So thank you for everything you do for our special country, Eretz Israel. Thank you for everything that you do for women. And you said also for men, but I will highlight for women because that's mostly what your focus is. We are truly grateful and say kol hakavod to everything that you've done. And you should just, grow from success to success. We should not need you in these emergency situations, whether it's health or whether it's for safety, which are the two aspects that you're involved in. You should have much nachat and enjoyment from your grandchildren. That is a super, super thing.
Lesley, thank you for having me. Thank you. It's really a pleasure.
You're very welcome. Thank you for taking the time to share your story with us. And, it's not something that everyone can do, and share these horrible memories that are, by every time somebody asks you to repeat them, then they're surfacing again. So it's not something that's a given that everyone can do. So thank you so much. Thank you to our listeners and to our viewers for watching another special episode of the Monday Motivation Spotlight. I'm Lesley Kaplan. A big thanks, as always, to our sponsors, to Eggert and Cohn Insurance in Jerusalem and Lali's Flower Boutique. And we will see you next week, every Monday, a new episode drops on the Monday Motivation Spotlight. If you like this episode, if you found it inspiring, please do like, give a comment, or to subscribe and follow. And that way, you'll be able to see more inspiring women just like the amazing Shari Mendes. Thank you again, Shari. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Lucy.